with my shoes on.
So he was telling me about spinning bees in the Alps.
Oh, yes. That's this little
That's a
lady.
foreign concept to me. Why don't you clue me in?
Okay, this particular wheel is what you would have gotten from the carpenter in the region of your village in the Swiss Alps. And it's actually held together by tension. The tight fittingness of the things are what holds everything together. The only place that you've got a pin that holds anything together is right here.
Yeah,
And this holds the treadle to the foot. And that is the only place there's an actual pin.
and I see you have threaded tensioner up
Yes,
here.
that is a thread tensioner.
I see two of them actually.
And well, it's only one tensioner. This is a drive band.
Yeah.
That actually drives the whole thing.
Well, you got this vertical screw here.
Okay, this is the mother of all. This section here is the mother of all. This is the twin sisters. These are the uprights that hold the flyer and the spindle. There is no whirl because a whirl is the second set of gear that goes back here. This one has no whirl. This is actually designed to come apart into about 19 pieces to be packed up. It's tied together. It's very lightweight, and that way you can put it on your back and truck across the Alps with it. Every woman would get the plain Jane, and then they would decorate it in their personal desires. So when they get them all together and they've got all these pieces laying around, they can identify their own machine.
Okay.
Now, castle wheels were originally designed in France in the 1100s. These are castles. Everything is vertical.
Okay.
Now, the traditionals or Saxonies are the ones that have the tilted tables. You also hear them called tilt table wheels. And it's the great wheel. The spinning wheels that you would see in Rapunzel and Sleeping Beauty, they were traditionals. Those were designed in England in the 1300s.
By tilting table, you mean which part do you mean by?
Okay, you would have 3 legs,
Okay.
sometimes 4, and the flat part would be actually tilted, so the legs on this end are taller than the legs on the back end. So this is pretty well close to the height or middle of the wheel, the spinning or the actual wheel part of the spinning wheel. And the reason for that was to keep the thing balanced. Okay, and it doesn't walk across the floor from you as you're trying to spin. So that was the reasoning for that. English and French, they try to be different from each other very much. You know, the old
500 years of fighting each other for no reason.
It's the fighting cousins. What can you say? But yeah, we have actually not changed the very basic designs of the spinning wheel, whether you're talking traditionals or if you're talking castles. The basic spinning wheel, even in the modern makes, are all the same. They had the same basic parts. This one has twin sisters. These are my twin sisters. These are my twin sisters. Okay? This is my mother of all, because this is where I do my tensioning, where I did my tensioning here. This tensioner and this tensioner are the same. That's my mother of all. The flyers are the same. The spindles are the same. This one has the whirl on it. This one has different sizes, so I can change speeds.
Okay.
So all of that. This is the tension on the flyer. This is the tension here for the flyer. This thin cord right here, it's called a brakeman. They call that one a brakeman.
Okay.
But you've got the same camber and caster going on here between the pedal and the wheel. There are certain bends that are required to make this work. So the crankshaft is the same, basic designs with slightly different tweaks, but the camber and caster is still the same. You still have a footman. The footmen are these vertical rods. This is the footman on here. This is the footman for the Swiss. Then you have your treadles. These are your treadles.
Now, would they have all had metal cranks in them, or
Yes, they all would have had metal cranks because they would have been forged by the wheelwright or forged by the blacksmith to the carpenter's specifications.
okay? So that's the only metal in these machines, basically.
Other than later on, you get the metal in the orifice. Because in the older style, now this one has metal on the receivers. On the older style, these were made of leather, heavy duty leather, double thickness of belt leather.
Okay.
Okay. The traditionals have a leather lacing that actually holds the treadle to the footman. So, because that's a bend point, it's a high bend point. So they use leather for that. But a lot of times the orifice, which is this piece here, it's wooden on this one. And most of the Swiss were wooden because they were into the wood. They didn't have as much access to metal, so the metal was reserved for the axle, the wheel axle, or cam, whichever way you want to put it. So that's where the metal was reserved for there. But even in colonial times, the orifices were cast iron that went through a double leather loop.
Okay.
It had a pin that came through and went through a leather loop back here. The loop would have been, the leather would have come through this upright and would have been pinned on the backside so it could be easily changed.
Okay.
This would have been a double thick belt leather that it would have gone through, and it had a pin in the back. So it could be easily changed. Those were kept lubricated with beeswax.
Okay.
So they use beeswax to condition the wood, but they also use beeswax to condition and preserve the leather. And to keep it from going squeak, squeak, squeak so much. So yeah, beeswax was used a lot. They would even use the beeswax inside where the footman would have rubbed, like this one, where the footman rubs against the cam. They would have used beeswax inside of there as a lubricant because it lasted longer than oils of the time.
Which you probably would have gotten from an animal anyway.
Right. Exactly. And a lot of times, seafaring, it was usually whale. Inside the United States, even in this area, you had Great Plains, or you had cane buffalo in this area. Out west, you have the Great Plains buffaloes. So you had buffalo here in Ohio, which most people don't know.
Cane buffalo. I'm not familiar with that.
They are bigger than the Great Plains buffalo by half. And
how big an animal are we talking about here? The Great Plains buffalo is a large creature.
Yeah, you're talking mid-size elephant size.
How many thousand pounds are we talking?
Right around 9 to 12.
9 to 12,000 pound animal where we're standing in northwestern Ohio.
Yes, all the way down to the Ohio River.
And when did they get rid of them?
They actually killed them off. They actually hunted them for the skins. They hunted them for the bones. They hunted them for the fat. They hunted them for the meat.
Yeah, I can understand why this would be desirable, but when were the last ones killed?
They were really annihilated when we started populating the Ohio Valley heavily. because they would get
So it'd be
onto
19th century then, or
no, we're talking early 18th century. They actually
18th century.
annihilated them because when they got to stampeding, they would level whole entire towns.
Yeah, that's plausible.
So they annihilated them because they were dangerous. But they would use those parts and they would use the oils from the fats to work on their wheels. The fat greases were used in wagon wheels. So they wasted nothing.
Well, it's so hard to get anything.
Oh, yeah. They would take the hair from brushing their mules and their horses, and they would keep that hair, and then they would spin it, which was hard on the fingers, but they would spin it, and then they would weave it into blankets that would be put on the backs of the pack animals. Because it's their own hair, they're not allergic to it. They're not going to have a reaction to it.
Okay, so animals are allergic to hair.
They can be allergic to certain fibers, yeah. Just like you and I.
Okay, your asides are more interesting than the whole story here. You know, between the animals being allergic to
their own everything but their own selves, yeah, pretty much.
And the cane buffalo, that's
yeah. The cane buffalo, they were originally found along the Ohio River in the canes.
Bigger than our western version.
Yeah, that's what I was just explaining. They were bigger than the western buffalo.
But I'd never heard of them before at all.
Yeah. You would have to go back into some of the older history books to get that. The older Ohio history books will have references to it, and it's just a blurb. It's not anything more in depth. But
I wonder if we have bones of them somewhere. Or
yeah, they still find them.
So is that an extinct species now?
Yes, it is an extinct species. Now there are offshoots of them around the world. The western buffalo is an offshoot of the cane buffalo, but they became smaller because of the lack of vegetation that was available here, because it was a cooler climate, so we had greater vegetation than they have out west, which is a warmer climate usually.
It's drier too.
Much drier. Thank you, baby. Yes. Thank you.
I suppose you don't mind if I put this on YouTube, or
No, sir. Go right ahead.
Well, I thank you.
You're quite welcome.
I'm Jerry, by the way.
And I'm Cheryl Clark.
Cheryl Clark.
Also known as She Who Stitches.
She Who Stitches.
Or the owner of Tangled.
Tangled.
As in tangled webs.
Or tangled threads, yes.
Or tangled threads. Yes. We'll leave it there. Okay.